Afternoon to everyone. I welcome you all in the 17th seminar conducted by University of Lucknow, Philosophy Department, Lucknow. Uh, Today there are two participants. First is Elika Mishra and second is Mridul. So I invite first Elika.
Thank you, Nikita.
Please continue.
Am I audible?
Yeah. Please
Okay.
continue.
So my topic of presentation is linguistic aspect of intentionality. I will be positing an analysis on two basic ideas of intentionality with an S and intentionality with a T.
Unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
Elika,
Unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now? Hello.
Yeah. Video unmute. Video also.
I'm so sorry.
No problem.
Okay. Am I audible?
Yeah. Audible.
Right. So first I'll talk about the theory and then I'll move to the questions and I'll posit the physicalist and the non-physicalist understanding of intentionality.
But you are
Over
not
here,
visible. Ilika, you are not visible. Okay, now fine. Good. Great.
okay, sir. Yeah. So I'll begin again. So my topic is linguistic aspect of intentionality. I bring forth an analysis between two terms, intentionality with a T and intentionality with an S. I'll be discussing two arguments from the physicalist and the non-physicalist notion. And I'll be bringing forth a few questions to see whether there is a linguistic criteria in intentionality. So when we talk about intentionality, the first person who comes to our mind is Brentano. And what he says about intentionality is that intentionality is the mental directedness towards objects, which is basically when we attend to objects. So in contemporary philosophy, when we talk about intentionality with a T, it's the movement of the mind to a particular object. However, in language, when we talk about intentionality with an S, then we are talking about non-extensionality, wherein we refer to say, for example, Frege's idea of Hesperus and Phosphorus, even though they have the same extension, their intention, that is, their connotation is different. They do not talk about they do not describe the same thing. One is talking about the morning star and the other is talking about the evening star. However, their extension, that is their point of reference, is the same, which is Venus, the planet. So going forth, I shall try to say when I'm talking about intentionality with an S and when I'm talking about intentionality with a T. Although the meaning of the word intentionality in contemporary philosophy is related to the meaning of such words as intention with an S and intention with a T, it ought not to be confused. The intentionality, which is non-extensionality, means that there is a logical feature between both the words and the sentences that they share. So, for example, creature with a heart and creature with a kidney points to the same extension. However, they have two different intentionality, which is the same example as Frege gives. So, what we are going to understand is that intentionality with the T is towards intending of specific states. Now, these specific states directly correlate with the specific states of the mind. So, we're talking about beliefs, judgments, hopes, desires, etc. Each and everything which have some form of etiology towards action. Therefore, one thing we must again believe is that intentionality with a T is focused towards something that is directed, that has an action attributed to it. Therefore, the states, the mental states that we talk about are beliefs, hopes, judgments, intentions, love, hatred, etc. According to Brentano, all of these states exhibit intentionality. So moving on to Brentano, in his book Psychology from the Empirical Standpoint, he says that every mental phenomena is characterized by the intention or the mental inexistence of an object. And this inexistence, even though it does not wholly mean the same thing, it is still a reference to a content. It is still a direction towards an object, which is again very similar to the idea that Frege gives when he talks about reference. So what inexistence of an object has is an eminent objectivity to the object that we are being directed towards. The second thesis that Brentano gives is, I hope I'm not going too fast.
Yeah, you are going little faster. You be comfortable. You are at home. Ah,
Okay,
and be little slow so that students
okay.
of BA also joined, so they will understand better.
So, so that was the first thesis by Brentano, wherein he talks about the intentional inexistence of objects, which is a kind of reference to an object, a kind of reference to the content of the object, and therefore the direction towards it. And because there's a direction towards it, there is imminent objectivity to the reference of the content. Second thesis by Brentano is that every mental phenomena includes something as object within itself, although they do not do so in the same way. Therefore, in presentation, something is presented. In judgment, something is either affirmed or denied. Again, in love or hate, something is loved or hated. And in desire, something is desired. That is what we call the movement towards the object of our intentionality. The third thesis that is posited by Brentano is that this intentional existence is characteristic exclusively to mental phenomena. So no physical phenomena exhibit anything like it. We can therefore define mental phenomena by saying that they are those phenomena which contain an object intentionally within themselves. Now here is where I will bring out the physicalist and the non-physicalist notion of whether or not natural languages can posit any intentional state. So let's first understand the meaning that Brentano is giving forward. According to the first thesis, it is constitutive of the phenomena of intentionality as it is exhibited by mental states such as loving, hating, etc., that these mental states are directed towards things different from themselves. So for example, if I love my mother, the object is my mother, sure, but my intention towards loving is different from my mother. My intention, the object of my intention is always different from that which is indeed loved. Then according to the second thesis, it is characteristic of the object towards which the mind is directed by virtue of intentionality that they have the property which Brentano calls intentional inexistence. According to the third thesis, intentionality is the hallmark of all mental states. Therefore, all mental states exhibit intentionality. Now, Tim Crane in his book, Intentionality as the Mark of Mental, puts forth the following ideas or following questions against Brentano's idea of intentional inexistence. Now, did Brentano mean that the objects onto which the mind is directed are internal to the mind? Therefore, he questions the inexistence criteria. Second, or did he mean that the mind can be directed towards non-existent objects? So, can our mind be directed towards a fictional character like Harry Potter, a fictional entity like a unicorn or anything of that sort? And again, the third question is, does he mean both that which is internal to mind, or does he mean, does he mean both that which is intentional to mind and the non-existent object? So are we capable of thinking both the ideas? So Husserl's take on this point comes from phenomenological analysis. Now for him, he shows that the essential property of intentionality, of being directed towards something, is not contingent upon something which is real, real in the physical sense of being real, and is which exists independent of our intentional act. To achieve this goal, two concepts are central for Husserl's phenomenological analysis of the internalist interpretation of intentionality. So the first is the concept of noema, and the second is the concept of epoch, which is phenomenological reduction. So by the word noema, Husserl refers to the internal structure of mental acts, and the phenomenological reduction is meant to help extract the essence of those mental aspects by suspending all presuppositions that we may have regarding both real and fictitious entities. Now, in this regard, we move to the physicalist notion. Now, for example, David Kaplan, he talks about the paradigm of intentional relation that satisfies the orthodox picture of intentionality, which believes in singular thoughts. Now, singular thoughts can be any thought about any object belonging to the physical realm of space and time. Now, a singular thought is such that it would not be available, or it cannot be entertained unless the concrete individual, which is the target or the reference of the thought, actually exists. So the propositional contents of general thoughts that involve abstract entities or properties or relations, all of them are present or are related to something concrete or something particular existing in reality, in space and time. Second is Frege's analysis. Now, Frege brings out the relational nature between two singular thoughts. Now, these two singular thoughts, which he took up, were from the point of sense and reference, wherein he talks about Hesperus and Phosphorus. And he, in order to understand how two singular thoughts can have a relational nature, posits two concepts. One is sense, which is the mode of representation of any reference, and the other is reference, which is the object that holds true for that reference. So again, if I were to allude to the examples that Frege gives, which is Hesperus is the morning star and Phosphorus is the evening star, even though the sense is different, one is talking about the time and space at morning, and one is talking about time and space in the evening. By virtue of space, we're talking about the location at which we can fix the morning and the evening star. But this fact that Hesperus and Phosphorus are the same, that identity or relational statement that we make about Hesperus and Phosphorus, and then go on forward to say that it refers to something else, which is your object of reference, which is Venus. That statement is a complex statement, and it involves an object of knowledge. So this statement is not something that comes a priori to you. And this statement is also not something which can be told just by the physical location and time of Hesperus and Phosphorus. Now, Frege's solution also reminds us of Mill's idea that proper names can only have a denotation, however, they cannot have a connotation. So they do not hold meaning per se, but they always denote to a particular reference. However, this we should note, Mill says primarily about proper names. The fourth person that we'll be discussing is Russell on denoting. He entertains the idea of logical proper names, wherein he says that there's an epistemological view that is entertained in any proper name, which has to be a logical proper name. So there are two criteria by which we understand a logical proper names, and both of them are subsumed by being directly acquainted with them. So what Russell says is that one cannot use in thought or in language a genuine logical proper name that refers to it unless and until that proper name singularly entertains a particular thought about it. So we have, by means of acquaintance, according to Russell, we hold a thought of either an object or a universal. And in this way, he says that those descriptive definitive statements and proper names that we think refer to a particular entity or a particular individual, he says that these are disguised or abbreviated definite descriptions. They are short. They are short forms or short encapsulated ideas of definite descriptions, and for that he gives a logical function. By virtue of this logical analysis that Russell gives, he can also help us in excluding or eliminating any of those relational and logical sentences that are negative in nature. Then the last author who again talks about the same thing with regard to proper names is Kripke. So in Naming and Necessity, Kripke says that proper names have a form of reference which is rigid, and definite descriptions have a form of reference which is alluding to the essential properties of the object, which are also rigid. So names that have rigidity, with proper names which have rigidity, they have a rigidity by de jure, as in by claim, by right. However, definite descriptions, when they have a rigidity by de facto, which is in reality or in fact, whether it is by right or not is regardless. These compound to necessary truths. So to understand whether intentionality with a T has a linguistic criteria, the analysis is directed towards intentionality with an S of intentional sentences. I'll repeat that once again. So if we are to understand intentionality, that which Brentano talks about, we need to allude to intentionality of sentences. Now, to examine intentionality of sentences, what we will focus on is two things. The criteria of non-extensionality. As I said when I was discussing about intentionality from Frege's point of view, intentionality with an S, the major criteria is that there is no extensionality to it. There is no characteristic out there in the physical realm which would be the referent of the intentionality, because intentionality is focusing on the sense according to Frege. So this is the first criteria, that two co-referential terms, Frege's example, Hesperus and Phosphorus, cannot be substituted salva veritate. So that is one criteria of intentionality with an S. The second criteria is they cannot have a external or existential generalization. So one philosopher who sort of, not entirely, but sort of validates Brentano's thesis is Kisson. He argues that reports or descriptions of intentional or psychological phenomena cannot be reduced to or eliminated in favor of descriptions of behavior. Descriptions of behavior will be epistemic. So he says that intentionality or non-extensionality of reports of intentionality with a T was taken to show that descriptions and explanations of psychological phenomena cannot be described or explained in terms of vocabulary describing non-intentional phenomena. Therefore, he goes on to say that Brentano's third thesis of intentionality, which is that intentionality is the mark of mental, is true. And therefore, he validates that. Dennett, on the other hand, says that natural languages, they do not have any intrinsic meaning of and by themselves. So whenever we are talking about any scientific statements, if we try to have a phenomenological reduction, as Husserl posits, we will see that words that we employ in natural language, in scientific language, they in themselves do not have any intrinsic meaning. Therefore, no utterances that are spoken in natural languages has any intrinsic content. Sentences of natural language fail to have any meaning unless they are conferred, unless meaning is conferred to them. And who confers these meanings? And who confers these meanings is us. We not only confer meanings by virtue of our thought, we also communicate those meanings among ourselves. So these meanings, as Putnam would say, are shared within a particular social and linguistic understanding of a particular community. Therefore, utterances borrow whatever is derived from intentionality. And in this way, Dennett alludes to an original or a primitive intentionality of human beings, which can be again compared to Carl Jung's collective consciousness, because even he talks about certain ideas and concepts which are original or primitive to human intentionality. We already have an idea or a concept or an understanding of these things. And what language gives us is, by virtue of acquiring a language, we get a symbol for it. Moving on to Fodor, in many of his books, he has argued that there is something called a language of thought. These language of thought, what it consists is mental symbols, which are both semantic and syntactic properties of certain original ideas or original and primitive intentionality of mind. Again, Dennett, he says that intentional states are of and about things other than themselves, which is very similar to what Brentano says. So for Dennett, the state of intentionality is for it that which has semantic properties. And for Fodor, who is also a physicalist ontologist, says that intentionality or semantic properties cannot be fundamental features of the world. The task is to show how an entirely, now this is a quotation, how entirely physical system could nevertheless exhibit intentional states. So against the idea of Brentano's no physical phenomena manifests intentionality, this thing is something which is completely unacceptable to physicalists. Now, if I were to conclude everything that I've spoken, there are basically two ideas wherein we say that certain objects allude to certain things that are anyhow understood by human minds by way of either the primitive understanding of certain things that we have by the virtue of being human beings, and those which are nonetheless attributed to by virtue of non-existent ideas. Now the question comes in, when we're talking about intentionality of mind, how important is the intentionality of the sentences to prove that we can, in a valid manner of speaking, have the idea of certain things that either do not exist or do not have a meaning in themselves. Those which do not exist, we still entertain the idea of those things. For example, we entertain the idea of mythical objects, we entertain the idea of ghosts, and we are often scared of it. But we do not have any valid idea or any valid logical arguments to prove the existence of these things. Yet we talk about them, yet we talk about them with meaning. The other question is that if intentionality is indeed important for the meaning of intentional states, then how do we say that natural languages and sentences which employ natural words, do they have a meaning in themselves? Do they have something which can allude to something which is not abstract and not universal? With this, I end my presentation. My presentation was not focused on giving an answer. My presentation was entirely focused on inventing questions. And with that, I would like to end my presentation. Sir?
Yes, wonderful presentation. And I would like that we can have questions also immediately if there are any questions. And Professor Rakesh Chandra sir is invited. Kindly, sir, please come and comment something, and then you can ask questions also. Professor Rakesh Chandra sir. Okay, it seems that he is there. Yes, very much he is here. Professor Rakesh Chandra sir. Okay, sir. Unmute yourself, sir. Unmute yourself.
Okay. Yeah, can you hear me now?
Now, yes, sir.
Yes, yes. Thank you very much, Elika, and thank you very much, Professor Pandey. Elika, I'm very happy that you took a very brave attempt of putting many things together. One or two things I think it would be useful if you were to further look at it. One, when we are talking about intention and extension in the old Frege, Russell, Kripke, Donnellon debate, it is actually about the terms as they are used. So the term Hesperus, what is the extension of that term and what is the intention of the term Hesperus? And then the rigid designator theory or the proper noun theory of non-connotation takes you to the idea that they refer directly without mediating through any intention. And this whole theory is quite neutral about consciousness, whether there is consciousness or not, and how is consciousness to be understood. The other discussion of intentionality, which is coming from Brentano up to Dennett and Zahavi and all of that, is primarily with reference to mind and with reference to consciousness and action primarily. So these two have to be separated a little. The other distinction that you tried to say that that in case of the rigid designators, the proper name will refer to something de jure and the definite description will refer to it de facto is not correct at all, because both of them can be, and they follow the Donnellonian framework, that sometimes they can have a direct attributive use, and sometimes they can have a direct referential use. So both the definite description as well as the proper name can both be used in these forms. So that you have to see, particularly when you're looking at naming and necessity as an essay. And I think the major thing which you have to do is to constantly understand that the old intention and extension debate in terms of meaning and reference is quite neutral about any judgment on the states of consciousness and their explanation in terms of physicalism or non-physicalism. While the other discussion of intentionality in terms of consciousness will always have to take a stand whether you are reductive, eliminative, translational oriented, or as Rorty and the others are calling it, disappearing theory. So that I think if you will take it clearly, it would help you greatly. Otherwise, I think you have taken a very good range of reading for your reference, and it was very nice to hear this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for this uh, deep and critical analytic reflection. Thank you so much. And with this, we open this talk for questions. If there are any questions, everybody is invited to ask questions. आप हिंदी में भी प्रश्न कर सकते हैं. अगर किसी को कोई
So I have one question, sir.
Okay, go ahead.
So, Chandra, sir, first thing, it was really nice to see you today. And second thing, thank you so much for everything that you told me. I'll look into it. This indeed is a problem because the initial discussion on intentionality with the T and intentionality with an S do not talk about consciousness at all, because they're purely focused on language, and they're purely focusing on how language or how meanings are directed to certain topics. So you are very right in saying that we have to focus on these things, and I cannot, like, without proper relation, attach these things to the later theories. But yeah, I mean, if you could, like, direct me into, like, the kind of readings, because again, like, these readings are, like, really old, and given that we are in 2020, referring to them constantly is also becoming somewhat obsolete. So I would really appreciate it if you could tell me how I may direct my understanding, wherein those things which do not talk about consciousness as presumptions, whether or not I can employ the same ideas.
No, I have a very short response to that, Beta. My response
Thank
is this, that when you look at Dennett's work, Content and Consciousness, he gives you a very clear kind of account in the beginning itself that he is actually not referring to the older debates at all. And therefore, any book on philosophy of mind right now, actually, it's only by courtesy that they say that this is a Cartesian debate, but they do not use that language at all. The new debate is actually with an assumption that some kind of a physicalism is true. And within that, also, they are taking the resources of the neurophysiologist and the experimental scientist, all of it as a part of their resource. Now, the earlier philosophers would not take it at all. So the terms of reference of the new debate in the past 20 years is well within the realist paradigm and pragmatic. Yeah.
Namisi, mute yourself. Namisi Misra.
Yeah. So that would be the kind. So if you're taking the modern discussion, you can bracket out the older discussion altogether, because this discussion does not take that. When you try and put them together, then there are basic elemental difficulties. Like as Professor Pandey will tell you, that when you look at Wittgenstein and Russell and up to Kripke, then you can find that there is a continuity where they're using more or less the same kind of understanding. Now they are using, because the methods are a priori in philosophizing, they are not using experimental science at all. Even in later Wittgenstein, you are not allowing the a posteriori methods to go into philosophical methodology. Though he is saying that there are multiple language games, etc., etc., but this is a phenomena that he is actually reflecting out of an a priori analysis. It is not a matter that I have seen different languages. Now this changes entirely in the past 20 years. So you are right, but to say that the old thing is obsolete will be wrong. It would be that these are two kinds of philosophizing.
Okay.
So it
Thank you,
was
sir.
wonderful again to listen so much, reflecting on Daniel Dennett and Electric Tradition. Ilika, you have done a wonderful combination of two traditions in philosophy, that is continental and analytic. So basically, you began with the phenomenology and you came to analytic, and you have even described the points of views of Brentiano and Kripke, Bertrand Russell, and so Fraga, and so many scholars in contemporary Western philosophy. So it was wonderful, and you
Thank you, sir.
can see that you have taken different philosophical traditions into one gamut of argument, and that is really kind of refreshing argument that you have provided, and it's nice to listen with such a large canvas that you have covered through reading. I'm amazed to see that you have read so much, that you could you talk so much. I mean, I'm really amazed that how much you have read for this presentation. It's wonderful to listen. One
So
is,
PhD, no, sir. This is part of PhD.
this is wonderful. You have taken deep subject for your philosophy thesis as well. That was your own choice. So this is nice that you have presented a wonderful way and new insights you have given. And I suppose that you'll include some Indian portion also if you feel like
Yeah.
that
Yes, sir.
in your thesis. So it was all wonderful, and your classmates, fellows of PhD group are very much invited to ask questions. Ishita Arora is there, and Ishita can ask questions. हिंदी में भी लोग बात कर सकते हैं. जबार Manal is there, and Deepak, BA student Diksha has come to join today. So many people are here. Dr. Prashant Shukla is also here. He can also ask questions. So this is good occasion that we can interact on this platform.